Myself again, my name is Allan Conway. I am a principal consultant with Zibia in the Microsoft services line. We are a global team of consultants covering everything in the Microsoft and Azure space, GitHub, and of course, a whole host of contact information. Basically, if it has Allan Conway, it's probably going to be related to me. The one exception there is the Eclectic Dev, which is my YouTube channel, getting off the ground there in this space as well. So feel free to connect with me in the community. Also a Microsoft MVP, as Sean had mentioned, in .NET and web. And my background, which will showcase itself in what I'm talking about today. I have over 22, 23 years experience exclusively as a software engineer and consultant in the app dev and cloud workspace, doing everything from .NET since its inception and front-end web client development. Took a journey there with Angular and TypeScript, and really immersed in Blazor and liking it as well. So that adds color and context to what I'll be sharing with you today. Little bit set the landscape about the agenda that we're going to talk about. So what we want to do is leverage, obviously, AI and GitHub Copilot to assist us with building Blazor applications. And so I'll start by kind of laying the land of what GitHub Copilot is, the value, a very, very high level look at how it works. It's key to understand that because it will help you when you're building, whether it's Blazor apps or any technology stack that you're working with, to understand how to use it correctly so that it doesn't feel like it's an unuseful tool. And we'll talk more about that, and then get into actually building a Blazor application, and then adding functionality and refactoring and testing and stretching out the tool as much as we can within the time we have allotted. So without further ado, let's get into it and kind of, again, let's set the stage about GitHub Copilot. Now, it doesn't matter which background you're coming from. If you're here today or listening to this and you're already using GitHub Copilot, there'll be some things that'll probably help you understand it further. If you're brand new to it, or maybe you've tried it and you're like, it didn't really work that well, hopefully I can help you understand why its value is. So GitHub Copilot itself, we know it's an AI-powered code assistant. It's there to help us within our IDEs. It's contextually aware. Now, this is really key to why this is such a useful tool compared to some of the other AI tools outside, like maybe ChatGPT on its own, because it doesn't necessarily have context of our code or whatever we're working with. We would have to copy and paste things, and it doesn't have that insight. That insight is the real value there to help us and to be accurate in what suggestions and how it's helping us build, in this case, our Blazor applications. It's also very flexible. It's grown almost exponentially in just a handful of years because there are multiple IDEs that it integrates with. We'll be focusing on Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio today, working with Blazor, multi-language support. This isn't like about the big three languages or anything like that. So if you're a Blazor developer, but you're also working with Azure or scripting, and maybe you're doing Python or some TypeScript or backend and .NET, it doesn't matter. You can use it in that entirety of whatever you're working with. It's powered by OpenAI models in the background, and we'll talk a little bit more about those large language models. But really, this is the next evolution in software engineering. I like to think of it as much as, going from Notepad to the IDE, or from books to the internet. Now, from being able to, do manual research and things of that nature, to having AI assistant in our code is extremely powerful. And I'm also going to try to be real pragmatic today as well. I understand these demos and such, FooBar and Hello World and entry-level apps, from the demonstration to the real world, right? Like enterprise application development. I can say that I as well use this daily in large enterprise code bases using GitHub Copilot with Blazor and other technologies. So if it hasn't been to your liking thus far, typically it's because potentially of not understanding how the tooling works. So hopefully I can provide some insight into that today. Now, this is not a comprehensive list. And when you think about Blazor pairing up with this, many of these aligns, but again, it can go across the entire technology stack, whether we're doing code generation or chat or learning something and edits and agent mode. And I'll showcase these explaining code. Think about this use case, like being able to go, you're pulled into a team. Hey, Alan, we need you on Team Bravo. They need another consultant. Get in there and help them out, whatever, you're joining that team. Well, how do we learn those code bases traditionally? Well, we pull it down. We look for documentation, wink, wink. Is there ever any? We maybe run the unit test if there are, just however we learn the code base. Schedule a meeting with somebody. Hey, can you give me the lay of the land on this new application? Well, now we have tools that can help us out with that. Refactoring code, legacy code bases, upgrading pieces and parts or holistic and breaking that down, fixing and debugging code. Huge help with GitHub Copilot. Maybe one of the biggest things that I have used it for. Doing code reviews, pull request summaries. There's just all sorts of things that you can use it for. So where's the value? Okay, great. Hey, Alan, there's this AI, everybody's talking about it. I used it a little bit. Again, I find that when developers have used Copilot and maybe they've turned away from it, they either think it's fancy autocomplete or they don't know how to exercise and use the tool correctly, and understanding that and its value is very helpful. So obviously things like increased productivity and staying in the flow. Let's talk about that one for a minute. Like, what does that look like? Let's go a couple of years back. You're developing a Blazor application and you either need to do some new code or you've got an error. Either way, you don't know how to do it. So you go out to the browser and you search for something, either an error or what you need to build, or look at the Microsoft Docs or whatever you're looking at. It could be Stack Overflow, Reddit, whatever, maybe some blog post. And you're looking at all this, you're out of the IDE. It's not contextually relevant necessarily. A lot of times we as engineers square pegged around hole because the solution's like, well, that's kind of what I needed, but that's not exactly. So let me, figure out the pieces and parts I can use. And then all of a sudden you see an ad for vacation, maybe. I mean, we're all human, and you click it and you lose, focus. And that's a little bit tongue in cheek. But the point is that we have to leave the IDE, working on our Blazor applications, whatever that we're working on. Now we can stay in the flow and expedite that process. We can compress the learning curve, certainly being able to ask natural language, free-form questions and task-oriented operations in Blazor apps to help and assist us. I mean, think of that journey before as well. All right, well, I've hit a wall. My peers don't know anything. I've checked with my colleagues. I put something on Teams. Now I got to go out to Stack Overflow. I got to post this question. Hopefully somebody around the globe will answer it. I'm in a pickle. I've told, on my sprints, I'm blocked. I got to wait for this, that kind of thing. Now, within a matter of seconds, we can get feedback and compress that learning curve or whatever we need to bridge that gap, which ultimately leads to save time and frustration, which also goes back up to DevX or developer experience. Happy developers are more productive. And, we all like the challenge of software engineering and application development and Blazor and things. But when it gets to a point where we're pulling our hair out and not productive, most folks don't find that super entertaining. So how do we get started? Well, once you have a Copilot license, one of the supported IDEs, and the license will be tied to your GitHub account. The licensing and such is a little bit beyond today, so you can take a look at that outside if you want. There's some links at the end about the GitHub Copilot documentation. Need to install either the extension or the plugin, or it'll be integrated into the IDE. Here is a best practice on this last bullet point. Keep your IDE and your extensions up to date now more than ever, because Copilot's features and fixes move at a nice click. Oftentimes I'll see people, especially if they're using something else at one of these other IDEs, and they'll say, I don't see this feature or that. It's because they're 6 months or a year out of date. Make sure you keep them up to date. Visual Studio, especially Visual Studio Code, will often update, monthly in the, when you shut down and restart, but Visual Studio is a little more explicit in that you need to update it. So let's go over to the code here and take a look. That I just want to give you, like, where is Copilot within the IDE? So in Visual Studio Code, starting off, kind of the flagship editor, you're going to see the most features over here. Once the very first thing you'll need to do is install the extensions. So you can see here GitHub Copilot, which will automatically install GitHub Copilot Chat. If you happen to see a little restart extensions, that means an update has happened. You can do that. It's very lightweight to do that. Once those are installed, you'll have an icon down here. You can get some information. You can turn off some of the, code completions and things of that nature. Again, a topic a little beyond today, but I'm going to lightly touch on it is, I'll touch on it here in a few slides, but there are different models that are available from OpenAI to assist us. Some are included, some are what are known as premium requests. This is a little hot off the press in the last month or two. It's been enacted, and it gives you a gauge of using those models. Just something to know about. Again, a takeaway for later today. We're going to stay focused on the features and our Blazor applications. Now, if you want to, you can get to the settings here. Once you're in settings, sometimes you can just filter on Copilot. One of the neat things over here in Visual Studio Code is there's actually a lot of customization that you can do. You can take a look at those. And if you go down through some of these, you'll start to see like preview tags and even experimental flags. So, if you can work right out of the box with this once you've authenticated, but you can also make some settings there as well if needed. So the other part of it is when you initially install it, it's you probably going to see it over here on the right like this. So you'll see over here, if users that are were accustomed to it being over here, you can just drag it back and forth. It doesn't really matter, has no impact on it. Moving over to Visual Studio now, Copilot Chat, if you look for it now, it's integrated in the IDE. So remember, it used to be a separate extension, but now if you're building like your Blazor applications, usually this little icon bell down here will tell you like if a new version of Visual Studio is available. It's a good idea to keep that up to date if possible so that you get the newest Copilot features. Moving back over, if you click on this, you can see, the different settings, making sure you can open the chat window if you can't see it. And I have it docked here next to Solution Explorer. You can always start a new thread from here or clear one out. And then also, just to give a little bit of a context about how this works for some of the users, especially for Visual Studio, if you haven't checked it out in a while, again, some of the different models, and it hints at the right, the premium nature or the included or standard models, and then toggling the different modes, ask versus agent, which I'll talk about in a few minutes here. And then we can prompt or put our, whatever we need within this window and interact with our code. I'll get more into that as well. Back over in Visual Studio Code, there are a few more models that are available, again, keeping in time. I mean, like premium requests, like look at GPT-4.5, 50x, and you only get like 50 credits a month. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I want to focus on the Blazor aspects. All right, so that's how we kind of get up and running with this. Whoops, sorry about that. Oh, I jumped to a different slide. Let me get right back to my slide here. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so need to know just a little bit about the large language models behind it, because it will help us when building our applications. So I've already kind of shown that these are powered by OpenAI models behind the scenes. Now for GitHub Copilot, they're tailored for technical prompts only. So you can't say something like, what's the best team in the NFL, and it would respond the Pittsburgh Steelers. But what you could say, build me a class and have an enumeration with the Steelers' years of the championships or something like that. The point is it's technically focused, unlike ChatGPT. Even though underneath the covers, they're powered by the same models, there's fine tuning and customizations that are done to it that Copilot remains technical in nature. I've shown you how to toggle the models. This is built the models underneath on the transformer architecture that basically allows, instead of reading kind of from right to left, or excuse me, left to right, like a traditional model, transformer model will look at the whole context at once and decide which parts are most relevant for making predictions, which is one of the most important points here. You need to understand is that AI by nature, and if you've already been using Copilot, this is part of it. It's probabilistic, not deterministic. Okay, so each time I interact, I could get something slightly different. It's not canned results. It's not like you work with Copilot in a Blazor app and say, how do I upgrade this component to use this grid and do this and that? And it just goes off and finds some canned static solution. So that's not how AI works. Knowing that it's probabilistic is important in your prompting. And then how it works, again, is it, just in a simplistic manner, is it uses the context from our code, whether it's the files we provide, or if it's in the case of like inline, like in this screenshot, maybe some of the tabs that are open. Essentially, the code that we provide or indicate will be sent off to a proxy service first to authenticate, sanitize, make sure there's no IP or publicly identifiable information, things like that. It wants to get down to exactly what the prompt is, takes out any negative language, and then that will go to the underlying large language model. It's important to note that with like business licensing and above, those prompts are deleted. It does not train or fine tune models, anything of that nature. And then that information comes back, make sure that it doesn't match any public code. That's adjustable in the settings. You will sometimes see that block you. You can modify your prompt, again, because it's probabilistic, and then those suggestions and solutions come back. So basically with this, the important piece here is that context matters. What we provided is critically important to get the suggestions back to be important. A lot of folks will start working with Copilot on very large code bases and try to do something very coarse-grained across the entire app. And I'll show a demo of that. It just does not work well because the context is too large. So we need to do a little bit of divide and conquer and be surgical about what we do. There are times we can give it broad context if we have a solution with hundreds of files, but there are times where we need to pare that down a little bit. So keep that in mind. It's an important tip. So focusing on our Blazor app, well, let's start from scratch and create a new Blazor app leveraging Copilot. Now, there's obviously multiple methods that we can use for scaffolding a Blazor application. We could work with the IDEs with the built-in templates, but for Copilot, we can ask it to build us a Blazor app. We can use one of the slash commands called /new to tell it to build us a Blazor app, include unit tests. It's a financial app, make sure you call it this and that. You can use something called the output automator pattern. Now, you can look into that a little bit later, but if Copilot can't do for you what you need it to do, because it's you can ask it to write code or a script to do for you what you need. So let's say you have 1,000 files that you need changes. That context could be too big, but you could say, write me a script to iterate through the directories in my Blazor app. Maybe you need to change some JSON settings or something, or something in files, and write a script that will then iterate through and do that. Also, we can prompt Copilot to use the IDE with the templates. So we're going to go ahead and move into, this is a blank directory right now. And let's start with an initial prompt under ask. I'll talk about the different modes here in a minute. But I just want to ask it, build a .NET Blazor web app unit test using server-side internet. I have to only create the bare bones files. So when I submit that, it's going to go through and it's going to give me here's what your app could look like. And it could create that workspace. I could tailor that however I need. And that's maybe why you don't want to use a template. Maybe you have customizations out of the box that you kind of have to hand roll yourself. And you could go this route to really tailor your prompt for exactly what you need. But in this case, maybe, and I'm in Visual Studio Code right now. I'm so much more familiar with building Blazor apps in Visual Studio, but maybe I'd like to use Visual Studio Code, but I'm not exactly sure how to do that. So in this case, I'm just going to say, tell me the steps to create a new Blazor app here using a project template and any extensions that need installing. I'd prefer to use that .NET template. And so I'm going to run it again here, this prompt. And what I'm hoping it'll show me is that it's going to tell me which extensions that I need in order to, let me do that again. I think it was running. Here we go. All right, so tell me the steps to create a new Blazor as a .NET template. So let me do this. I want to rerun without, so that, okay, here we go. Here's the steps. .NET SDK, I've got that. Obviously, I have Visual Studio Code, and I need some extensions. I need this C# dev kit. I have that because if I was to check over in extensions and go to C#, I have the dev kit. So I'm good to go for that. I can hop back over to chat, and it says, it gives me some instructions to basically use the CLI, but I don't want to use the CLI. So I can have a continued conversation. So update the above. Tell me how to use the command palette, not the .NET CLI. Certainly, here's how you do it. We can go to the command palette and ask for a new project, and let's go that way. So I'll go into the command palette, and it's telling me, well, here's .NET new project, or if I have the dev kit, C# new project. So let's go into new project. I'm going to search for Blazor, and we'll do this. I want to do, you can see the different templates. This is mirroring like Visual Studio. So I've got another way to do this. I got a Blazor web app. Let's call this the Trailblazer app for the conference. Trailblazer app conf. That's cool. All right. Default directory. That's fine. That's fine as well. But now I want to show all template options because some of you are wondering, hey, Alan, how about interactive render mode and things of that nature? You can go down into any of these and you could pick, what you want. Do you want a WASM app? Do you want auto? All these types of things. Now it'll create my project. So it's building out my project right now. I'll go over to my files and I have my application. So within that, and let me just go ahead and run this one, start debugging. Let's see, I think I have a old one here. Okay, so we're good. Let's make sure I start debugging. And I want to pick the conference app. So I'll go ahead and spin this up. And once I spin this up, I should be able to see my bare bones application that it's running. Now, obviously I could have done that from Visual Studio as well. And here's my, basic app, everything's working. And so we're going to enhance this here in a second. All right, so let's go back to our application. And that's kind of the, the startup. We've got our initial application and we've used Copilot to do that. I'm also able to open up in Visual Studio as well, the same application if needed, and we can run from there. The IDE experience is really a preference because it's still the Visual Studio Code is the flagship editor. So you're going to get a few more Copilot features in there, but I will tell you Visual Studio has done a tremendous job keeping up with it. So if you're working over here in GitHub Copilot chat, you can certainly do many of the same things with agent mode and ask mode and things of that nature as that loads up. All right. So let's get back to our presentation here and look at the next topic. So you've seen some, I've used Copilot chat a little bit to prompt, but there are different modes. There's Copilot inline directly in my code that can assist. We've looked at chat. So inline is convenient. You're typing along, you're coding, and it might begin to provide some suggestions. Now, I'll tell you, there's some preference on that. Some people don't like that, and it kind of a little heavy-handed gets in the way. Some people really like that. I'll show a brief example of that. As it evolved, initially, we only had inline and chat. Then edits came along. And the reason what was happening is Copilot chat was doing a great job saying, here's your code in Blazor, or forget about the new app. I need a new component that does or a new service or whatever, and it would tell me what the code was, but it didn't do a good job of actually creating the code or inserting it in line. So edits came along and it did that much better. It created the file or inserted in the file and allowed approving or rejecting those particular edits. And you could have a continued conversation. So multi-file edits. Then you have agent mode, which is iterative. It's really the, kind of the ultimate in all of these. Like you've got something that's not super succinct, but task oriented that you need to do, whether it's refactoring or updating or creating. And it will not only create and do those things in lines, but check and make sure the build's working. It's really end to end, and it can use a broad context. So taking a look at some of these, let's go back over into our application here. So for example, let's go into our new, application. And as I mentioned, maybe I want to look at something like here, and I'll go over into my chat window. Again, if you don't see it, it'll be over here. You can always give new context here by hitting the new chat when you want something over here. But for example, let's take a look at something like, what's the best way? Let's go into one of the other files. Let's go into like the weather. All right. And it's got the code directly in it, and say something like this. What's the best way to make an API call from this component without directly doing it in the component? Something like this. So, I'm doing some code here, and it says the best practice is injection with a service class that handles. Now, remember with chat, it's not actually going to insert that code, but it's showing me like a weather service, registering that service and how to use that. Now, if I did that same thing with, let's say, edit mode, and I'd say, something, the same prompt right here, now it's going to actually create that code. So you'll see the difference here. You see, and it's showing me, and I can toggle through these differences. By the way, doesn't matter if you're doing this in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code with Blazor applications. It'll have this same capability. So if I jump over into my Trailblazer app and go over to let's go back over to one of the files here into the pages, and let's go back into actually this one already has a little bit, but if I could say, actually, let's go back over into something like the counter page or something like that, into the Razor CS. Go over into chat. You can see I've got agent. Now, one note that is different: there is no edit mode in this. You just have the capability to do the ask an agent. What's happening realistically with the edit mode, by the way, is that it really was kind of a stepping stone before the agent mode came out. So I'll tell you, most often I'm either asking questions in Blazor or using the agent mode. So once again, you could do the same thing. It will go through, offer up, what way to do that, and then you can go through, and it'll go through the changes, and you can toggle just the same. So if I go over in here, I can keep or I can undo. I can toggle through these. This is much more powerful. Now, if I do agent mode, that's even another step. So for right now, I'll just go ahead and say undo that, and we'll continue to move along to some of the other examples. All right. So also know that when you are in ask mode, there are agents and slash commands that will help you along. You can always get to these by doing /help. Now, when you're in edit mode, if you happen to be in Visual Studio Code in your Blazor app, or in agent mode, these aren't necessary because it'll look at the broad context. But when you're in Copilot chat, you may want to use some of these to assist you. So if you go into like Visual Studio Code, for example, and I'm in ask mode right here, I can do something like, let's ask it a question here. I want to show a couple of different things here. So one of the things is I'm going to use the app workspace, which gives the context of the entirety of the app. Now, remember, if you're in an enterprise Blazor application, that may be too big, but in a question like this, this would help and make sense. I can also narrow that down by using the hash tag and say, I can actually reference a direct file. So how does that Razor work in relation to how this Blazor application is bootstrapped? So it'll use the context of the application. And again, this is, I'm asking it to explain something to me. So it talks about, defined at the root and how it's bootstrapped and program.cs, and gives me all of that information. Now, think big, think past the demo applications. How can you use this in your enterprise Blazor applications? The legacy parts of the application, parts that you don't know, other developers worked on, other consulting or contracting teams. You can go in there and you can start to pick apart, and how does this work? And how do I refactor this? And you can break it down and give it specific pieces. So that's a really important part. Remember, when you're in ask mode, you can see the different agents, which are these like so at workspace, like creating tests or fixing or new code or VS Code. And these have expanded over time. You can even create your own agents if you need to, but there's a whole lot that you can do within there. But if you do toggle over to like agent mode, you won't necessarily see these that you do when you're in ask mode. So it's just important. There are a lot of helpers there for you in that context. Now, code context, as I mentioned, is really important. So understanding the different code context and how we are relevant and what we need. Again, usually if there's any cynicism towards GitHub Copilot and people are like, I use it and AI, shmai, it doesn't really help. I can do it faster. Typically, again, it has to go back about the context. You're in an enterprise application and you're like, Alan, I've got 800 files. I use that workspace and it blows up. Like I can't do that. Like I need to, have relevant context. And it's important to do that, to be as precise as possible and work outwardly. Give it a file, give it a block of code, give it a few files. And when needed, you can say at workspace and those things, if you're in the ask command or if you're in agent mode, it will be very powerful to pick what it feels is the appropriate context, but you can help that along. And this does go into prompt engineering. So the prompts that we put in there are really important about how we craft those. For example, let's say you're at work and your coworkers stop by and they say, hey, Alan, we're going to lunch. What would you like? And I say, food. All right. Well, they go out and they get me a piece of pizza and a soda. They come back and I say, I didn't want pizza and a soda. I wanted a chicken salad and a bottle of water. Well, they would have gotten that for me had I been specific. But since I was too broad, they satisfied the request, but it wasn't accurate. This is what prompt engineering is about. So you can actually write paragraphs of, I need this code, use these patterns, make sure you don't do this, make sure it's .NET 9. Don't use this. You can give all these guardrails that you need, just like you were if you're writing requirements or if you were talking to your coworker. It's very important to be specific and then provide that relevant context for it. So let's take a look at adding some functionality to our application. So, we've got a bare bones application, but we need to actually add some functionality into our Blazor application. So let's go back over. And again, I could be in Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio. It doesn't really matter in this context. But what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and start. I want to show you, by the way, a couple of cool things. So let's go into, let's say like Visual Studio for a second. And or we'll do this in Visual Studio Code. So if I want to add under my pages, that right now, for example, all of the code is in a code block. Now that's neither here nor there. We all know that's preference, but I actually do like the separate code files. So if I do that, I'll just put in a weather.razor.cs. Okay. Very nice. I love that it puts it in the tree view right there. So I can go ahead and in my weather.razor, I'm going to take what's in that code block. Let's plop it over there into my weather.razor. Actually, what I need to do is first create a public partial class. Let me just, to expedite this a little bit, I'm just going to steal some of this, but we could use Copilot as well if we wanted to. So for example, I'm going to do this on purpose. I'm going to give it the wrong namespace. And I want to do that so that it doesn't do correctly. So we'll cut that out, put this over here. And one of the things that is not going to work right away is because I know that I'm definitely in the wrong namespace because the name of this is Trailblazer Conf. Now I could have asked Copilot to help me with that along the way. Over here, we don't need this code block anymore. So we're good on that. And if I save everything, we should be in good shape. Now, here's one of the things that we see over here with forecasts. Why is it not seeing that? And so let's go ahead and use that with Copilot and just, let's go ahead and use edit mode and say, fix this code. And so I could have given it, this, it says the code's missing code block, but that's not actually what I want. This goes back to being too broad about this. Say, fix this code. It is now in. Let's use our file command. So this is the weather.razor.cs file that is present. And so let's go ahead and show it. It says it's going to go through and fix that and make this the correct one. I also had the wrong name of the class. So we've fixed that. And we've got this fixed. And if you want to take a look, you can click on it. And again, you can see what's been changed here. So it's got the correct name of the class in it. So this is, one of the ways that we can work with this. And if it's not working correctly, let me see here. One of the things we can do also, I want to show you, is that if we build the application, let's say we get an error, and we can also take that error and put it over into our application if we're having any problems there as well. So we probably got something cached here that it's not reading. But I also want to show you a really cool prompt. You saw how I did that manually, right? So let's go back. What if I wanted all of my pages to have the capability to have the CS file associated with it in my Blazor application? So I'm going to say create CS files associated with each Razor component in this app. Move the code from @code block into the new class. Make sure to use the correct naming and ensure the class is made partial. So it's going to go through and take a look in my application. So it goes through, checks, make sure that it's working. It's going to go through, read all of those, create me the class. Now I might have to iterate on this a little bit, but let's take a look. You can see it's starting to create like the counter razor and the error razor pages. It's still in process right now. So it's, you can tell it's removing those code blocks from it. Now, again, this is a rudimentary operation. Think about the building blocks in your larger applications. Like, how could I use this same type of prompting to refactor legacy code, to build new code? I've introduced a new library in Blazor. I don't know how to use it, something of that nature. And so let's take a look over in the tree. We now have the counter razor, we have the error razor, and we also have the weather razor. So, if I want to give it a sanity test here, I'll go ahead and do .NET build, and the application still builds. And let's go ahead and start running it again, just make sure everything is intact here. And if we go back out into, it should pop up our browser here in a second, let's see how we're doing. Counter, everything is good to go. All right. So going back over into our application, there's one way, but let's go ahead and add some additional new functionality here. So let me take you see how this is just incrementing on this static count. By the way, I'm going to finish this one off. We'll keep that. That's good. This time I'm going to highlight this, and let's just use edit mode for this and say, how can I update this line to use a random value and not add to the previous value? So I want it to go ahead and make this. This is kind of a succinct operation. it goes ahead and it will create a new random between 1 and 100. Now, obviously, I'm in demo mode, so I'm quickly accepting a lot of these, but we would place scrutiny on this. I would go through, I could toggle through the changes. Maybe I have multiple files. This case, this looks pretty sharp. So we'll go ahead and start debugging once again. Again, depending on the changes and hot reload and things like that, working with Blazor, your mileage may vary, but that's one of the reasons I'm demoing in Visual Studio Code. It's very fast to toggle between. But yes, we have our random number. But that's not enough. I want to do more. I want to add more functionality. So now let's go ahead and give ourselves a new context here. I'm going to go back. I want to be in this counter razor, but let's go back. This time I'm going to use the agent mode. I'm going to stick with that from here on out, because again, edit mode isn't over in Visual Studio. And there might be a question popping up, edit mode versus agent mode. Remember, agent mode is more autonomous and it will continue through and iterate and check its changes, as opposed to edits, which was really a step up from chat, which instead of just showing you the code would inline the code, but not be as comprehensive in the end to end. But in this case, I'm going to say add a grid that stores the results of the counter value and displays them below as a CSS table. Make sure it's pageable. But I also, just to be thorough, I want to make sure that I'm adding in my C# file. You can see here that I've added, remember I talked about context, and let's go back just in case it needs to use it. I want to add let's add a new file. And you might have guessed it, I'm going to add my counter.razor.css file. I just want to have that available in case it needs it. So I'm going to add the CSS because I'm envisioning a potential where it's going to maybe need that. So it's going to go through and add a grid. Now, I could be very specific. What component library do I want to use? Have I pulled one in? Do I need a new NuGet package? Do I want to use a certain styling? Because I get it. Again, I'm in demo mode. This looks great, but my prompts in a real world scenario are probably going to be to add several more guardrails, for being very specific and opinionated about what I want this to do. And so it's going through and continuing to work. You can see that it's working. Now in Visual Studio, just as a note, when it's working, you won't see the spinner. You'll see this little purple visual at the bottom. It's kind of hard to see, but if you're looking for it, like, is Copilot still working? So you can see it over there working. But again, how you add context over here, you can add a file and type it in. For example, I can add my Razor file. You can actually drag and drop things in too. So I can take a file. Oops, I'm sorry. Actually, in this one, in Visual Studio Code, I can do that. I can actually take a file and I can drag it down into here like this if I need to. All right, so it's added me a grid. And I can, again, click on the files and I can see what's been added in that. So it looks good. I'm going to go, assume. But I've got a couple of things here that potentially look like they might be errors. Let's go ahead and build the application and just see. Sometimes the application gives a false positive. That's a Visual Studio Code thing. Let's go ahead and run the application and see what we're looking like here and how this looks, if it actually added the grid or not. Go into counter and, hey, would you look at that? I've got a grid. Although I don't really like that grid. It's not looking too hot there. So let's go back in. But think about that for a second. Like, it went, productivity wise, real world scenario, I would place more scrutiny. I obviously wouldn't want it to disappear. I might give some more information about it, but I don't have to hand roll all of those lines. There definitely will be some ebb and flow as I work with this. Now I want to actually place some more scrutiny on that. So what I'm going to do is take a look here. And again, I'm going to give it that CSS file and the other Razor file just in case. But what I want to say here, let me just close and reopen that because I think let's see if that'll fix. But anyway, go back over here. update the grid to be more dynamic and use Bootstrap, retaining paging functionality, update any code as needed. That last part, honestly, is probably superfluous. I may not actually need that. You know, you don't necessarily have to say update any code that's needed because it's going to go ahead and do that for me. So it's going through. Now, for those of you that have seen maybe some of what's gone through here, we can notice these Bootstrap classes. Let me go ahead and try to run the application. Now you'll notice that even though I haven't accepted it, I actually can test it to see if it's actually working the way I want. And it is, but it's not exactly perfect, but I've got, some of the paging in place. And I could go back and then continue to iterate on that to say like, I don't like how the paging is going and things of that nature, so that I could continue to iterate on that. But I want to get it through a few more examples before we get to the Q&A. So let me jump back over to that and take a look also at refactoring code. So we can refactor code, and we did that right there. Like we said, I want to be able to improve upon this. We created a grid, and then I want it to use Bootstrap. But you could also say things of like, I need to refactor this into a separate service. So let's actually take a look at how we could do that. Those of you that are familiar with so we'll go ahead and keep that for now. So those of you that are familiar with the weather, the bare bones demo application, some of this you wouldn't actually do this directly in this. So I'm going to create a new context, and I'm going to say, how can I, we kind of talked about this earlier. How can I refactor this into a separate service that's injected? I only want the logics that's reusable to decide the weather, and really shouldn't be in a component. That's good best practice for, web development. The summaries should go into their own static file. Like these summaries here, I also want that. So I'm using agent mode, and I want it to go through. So it's looking like it's going to create the weather service. It's going to create the weather summaries. And it's asking me, would you like me to do it? Because I asked it in kind of a question format instead of instructive. I should have just said, generate this code. So now I said, yes, would you like me to generate these files? So it's going to go through, makes the weather service, and it's going to add that. And then also it's going to go in and update program.cs. So I'm going to kind of give some insight into that. It's going to inject the new service. And also, what I'm happy to see is it's getting all of this meat and potatoes out of the component where it should not be. It should be in a .NET service of its own that gets injected into the component. And it tells me that it's done this. It's updated weather CS. It's updated program. We've got the new weather service, and we have the summaries. Let's go ahead and keep that, start debugging, and go through this and take a look and see what we've got here. And if we go back over, is it still working? The weather the weather component is still working. That's all been refactored with that new code. So now if I go over to Weather Razor, look, it just has the injected service here, and it calls get forecasts. And so this is working off of that quickly to refactor. Again, in real production mode, I'm going to take some scrutiny and probably also create some unit tests. So two last examples before we get to this Q&A here, excuse me, is to talk about, we do have the ability to do unit testing. Now, whether you're in the ask mode and use one of the / commands, or we can tell the agent mode, create the unit test for this file, inject it, where do I want that? So we could take a look at this. If we came over into this weather.razor, we could say something like, if I come over, I'm going to start with new context because this is different. And I'm going to do it off the weather service here. And I'm going to say, create a new test file for the weather service under, well, I put the wrong name because it has conf at the end, but add in unit tests. I want it to be in unit. And you can see that it has generated the new tests for me, and it's got multiple iterations. Now, in a real world scenario, I'm going to ask it, maybe specific flows. I want negative and positive tests for these, for what, in this Blazor application, maybe something specific. But for this, it's done a good job. And then obviously I could go over to my test explorer and run that for those new tests. I do have them in my other application. If you don't like something that you've seen, you can always undo it as well. And then the last example, this is really cool. So I want to go ahead and run the application. This is another real world scenario. And I want to use something that's called Copilot Vision. So let's say we're in here and you got a bug, and the bug was that button's supposed to be green. We have our own theming. Like, why is that not working? And you don't know how to override the styles. Well, one of the things that we could do is, I know that if I say like background color is green, green. There we go. Now my button's green, right? Well, let me go ahead and take a screenshot of this. And obviously this is an expedited example. You can use any tool. It doesn't really matter. I just have a screenshot here. So I'm going to highlight this button. I'm going to highlight this in the DOM. And then I'm going to highlight this and also the button primary. And that will help. So I'm going to go over back. You could do this in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go back over and I'm going to open my counter here. I'm going to go to agent mode. I'm going to paste in that image. See the pasted image? And I'm going to give it a prompt that says, I need the button, and I can highlight that if needed, to have the color green and override Bootstrap's primary button color. This is only for this one button. So I do not want this to be in app.css. I don't want anything global. I need this to override, apply this only to this file right here, which is the counter .razor. And the reason I'm doing that hashtag file, I can't copy and paste that in there. This is important. Make the smallest changes possible and don't refactor anything else. See the image for DOM where I got it working manually. So it's going to go through, it's going to inspect that DOM, but you could also have a mock-up of a Blazor component and say, create me a component that looks like this. Let's try a different model. I'm just going to do this for expedited. I can hit my up arrow, by the way, and get that same prompt. And let's go ahead and try that again. And if I need to, I can slightly change that. So it says, I'll modify the counter razor file to override the Bootstrap. I should have given it the CSS. Let's see here. It actually does, well, it inline the style. And so what I would do next, as we've seen in the session, I'm going to tell it, I don't want you to inline that style. I want it to go into the CSS. So I'll just quickly say, don't inline, use counter razor.css. And so now it's going. So again, if you don't like something that Copilot does in your Blazor application, then tell it that. And you can have that iterative process. So now to go through, oh, it sees I want you to see that. I'll move the button styling from the inline approach to the razor file. So you can see sometimes you have to guide it along. This is not completely autonomous that you can just, and there's a lot about vibe coding and things like that. But reality is still very heavy handed on the part of the developer to instruct and guide. All right. So that's kind of wraps that up. I would like to get over to the Q&A. I just showed you vision. That's what that is when you paste something in, whether DOM or errors. UI mockups, it can interpret and be very valuable. And we also looked at fixing code. When I had those problems, I say, fix this code. You know, if you're working in the browser in your Blazor application and you get an error in the browser, copy that out, bring it back into Copilot, use the ask, do at workspace, or if you know where the area is, tell it and say, help me out with this. Here's some useful links that you can screenshot. Essentially, if you go to the docs.github.com and look for Copilot, you're going to get lots and lots of good information. There's just so much more beyond today that what I can show with the features, but hopefully it gave you the building blocks for that.